I found a tree in my backyard. I know that sounds silly. Like, how exactly does one find a tree in their backyard? How wouldn't they know it was there? It does sound strange, but I promise you that's exactly what happened. Little did I know at the time, the discovery of this tree would go on to greatly shape my reality for the ensuing months. I live on 1.5 acres of land, in a particularly arboreous area of West Virginia, so the random addition of another tree was probably something that would have gone largely unnoticed, but I noticed. Not because I knew my property like the back of my hand, or anything like that. It was more so that the tree had a striking appearance, not like any tree I had ever seen before. For starters, it wasn't an overly tall tree. I would guess no more than about 20, maybe 25 feet high. It had an excessively thick trunk with gnarled roots and long winding branches that stuck out more sideways than up, with adorning foliage akin to that of a willow. And the tree was of a deeply ashen hue. I woke up the morning up January 14th, 2020, to see it standing amidst the other frost-covered, leaf-barren trees that took up residence on my property. It certainly stuck out like a sore thumb. Not knowing what else to do, I placed a call to the Department of Natural Resources, figured it couldn't hurt, and if anyone could tell me anything about this tree, it would be them. The lady on the other end of the phone sounded rather confused as to my query about the mysterious tree in my backyard. Almost as if she thought I was some sort of prankster who was just pulling her leg for a laugh. I assured her I was serious, and that it was in fact not a joke. She put me on hold for about 10 minutes before returning and letting me know that they would send somebody out to look at the tree within the next 3 days or so. I thanked her and hung up. I spent a decent portion of the day staring out at the tree, trying to make sense of its sudden presence. Trees of that size and stature usually take decades upon decades to reach this degree of maturation. But here, we had a tree that seemed to sprout up overnight. That night, and for several nights thereafter, I would hear a howling, tempestuous wind coming from the east that was sometimes accompanied by resonant, nondescript phonations. At first, it was a bit tough to sleep through, but I got used to it rather quick. 3 days later, a man named Russ, who worked for the DNR, came to my house to inspect the tree. He asked me where the tree was, and I showed him to the backyard and pointed it out. He pulled out a pen and a clipboard and walked up to the tree. He walked around the tree several times, writing stuff down on his clipboard intermittently and snapping a few pictures here and there before asking me if we could talk inside. I agreed and we went inside. He explained to me that after cataloging all the attributes of the tree, it didn't seem to match up with any species of tree that he was familiar with, or that should or would be growing in these parts. He admitted that he was at a loss. He then asked me how it got there, to which I told him I wasn't sure, and that it had just kind of showed up there 3 days earlier. He looked up at me with a raised eyebrow and went back to writing on his clipboard. He followed up that question with several questions about my mental health history, as well as my relationship with alcohol and drugs. I didn't really care too much for that part. While I was known to enjoy a drink or two on occasion, especially a good bourbon, my drinking had never gotten to the point that I wouldn't notice something as blatantly obvious as a tree suddenly growing in my yard. After that portion, Russ concluded his report, letting me know that he would be in touch. Before he left, I asked him what would happen next. He said that he would submit his findings to geologists and arborists to see what they could make of it. He then said that there was a possibility that they may want to harvest the tree and study it for scientific purposes, given its peculiar origins, and that they may be willing to pay handsomely for the opportunity to do so. That part sure sounded good to me. On that, he bid me adieu and made his way to the front door, where I let him out. I then watched as he got into his van and drove away. The next couple of weeks went by as normal, save for the occasional strange noises at night. Meanwhile, the tree just stood there, looming over my backyard. One Wednesday, as I was cooking that evening's meal, a knock came at my door. I went over to see who it possibly could have been. When I opened the door, I was greeted by 2 men in matching suits. They flashed their badges and told me that they were with the FBI, and that they had gotten wind of a mysterious tree in my backyard. I confirmed their suspicions and told them the whole story pertaining to the tree. They stood there, ever unflinching, as I regaled them of the mysterious tree. After I got done telling them the story, they thanked me for my time and made their way towards their car. Before they could leave, however, I asked them what it was that they were concerned with. They told me that the abrupt appearance of an unidentifiable tree had come up on their radar as something that could potentially be a matter of national security. I asked what that meant, to which they told me not to worry, that it was under control, and to have a nice day. After that exchange, they got into their car and sped away. Not knowing what to make of that discourse, I just headed back inside to finish making my gumbo. A little over a half an hour after the FBI agents left, there came yet another knock on my door. Who could it be this time? I thought to myself. I got up from eating supper and went to see who it was. I opened the door to see my ornery neighbor Bill, flanked by his equally unpleasant wife, Carol, standing there. They ran a farm just next door. "What can I do for you, Bill?" I asked. "I noticed several government entities been stopping by your residence. What you got going on here, Reginald?" "Well, if you must know, a tree appeared in my backyard." Little did I know, the utterance of that sentence would set something off in Bill, and would set in motion an unbelievable chain of events. "A tree? What kind of tree?" he inquired. "Well, that's the thing, Bill. I'm not exactly sure. And on top of that, I'm not entirely sure how it got there either." "Been hitting the sauce a bit too hard there, eh, Reg?" he said with a small chuckle. "Not more than usual now. I suggest you mind your own business." "What goes on in these parts is my business," he retorted. "So, what's so damn special about a tree?" "Well, given that it's currently unidentified, it may be extremely rare, or even one of a kind. The guy from the DNR said it could be worth a bit of money. Now, if you would kindly show yourself off my porch." At that, Bill's ears perked up. "Money, you say?" he said before a sly grin grew across his face. "Well, I'll be seeing you around, Reg," he said with a nod before he and Carol made their egress off my front porch, and I went back inside to enjoy my evening in peace. As the months went by, the tree remained largely unchanged. As spring wore on, and the leaves reappeared on the surrounding trees, the enigmatic tree stayed the same. It bore no fruit of any kind, and even stranger yet was that as the birds returned from their winter haven down south, never would they perch on the tree. It was almost like the birds knew something about this tree that us humans didn't. Another strange thing that I noticed over the course of those so many months was that the tree branches never moved. A stiff breeze couldn't cause even the slightest sway. I would look out on some of the windier days and see all the other trees blowing in the harsh wind, their branches whipping back and forth, but not that tree. That tree stood firm and motionless. Aside from the strange goings-on with the tree, I've also had to deal with other such nuisances recently. From time to time when I'd be outside doing chores, I would see Bill peering over the fence, just staring at the tree. Sometimes he would even be equipped with a pair of binoculars. No telling what he was trying to glean from that. One night after midnight, I even caught him trespassing on my property. He was just standing in front of the tree, staring up at it, unmoving and completely transfixed. I loaded my shotgun, went outside and chased him away, yelling at him to get and letting him know that if I caught him on my property again, that I wouldn't hesitate to call the authorities. The crazy fool was off his rocker. He had seemingly become obsessed with the tree. As strange as Bill had been acting, it was around early June that I encountered just about the oddest event yet since the tree's arrival. I was out chopping wood in the backyard when I noticed a caterpillar making his way towards me, just inching along on the ground. I bent over to pick him up and move him to the garden. After placing the caterpillar in a bed of marigolds, I turned around to see what must have been hundreds of caterpillars coming towards me, in what I imagine was about as hurried a fashion as caterpillars could go. They all made their way past me, into my garden and other shrubs. I may not know a whole lot about the migratory patterns of the common caterpillar, but it appeared to me that they were all inching away from that tree. I had never seen such a sight in all my life. A couple days after the incident with the caterpillars, as I was sat on my couch watching TV, there came a knock at my door. I turned the TV off, got up, and made my way towards the door. I opened it to see two people in white lab coats standing there. One was an older gentleman with gray hair, black, thick-rimmed glasses, and a very serious demeanor. Next to him was a younger lady with shoulder-length light brown hair and bright blue eyes. "Can I help you folks?" I greeted them. "Are you Reginald Walker III?" the man asked. "Sure am. And who might you be?" I responded. "My name is Dr. Ben Gosder. I'm from the Laramie Ronson Research Institute in Hialeah, Florida, and this is my research assistant, Gabby." "Hello," Gabby said, in a chipper manner, with a smile and a wave. "She's a geology doctoral candidate at UC Santa Barbara. We're here about your tree." Man, doesn't anybody ever stop by just to say hi anymore? I laughed to myself. "Sure," I replied, "but how'd you hear about me?" "We were contacted by the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources. We were then contracted to do research on the tree, per your approval," he answered. "Yeah," Gabby interjected with an ardent tone of voice. "We believe we could be on the verge of a major scientific breakthrough with your tree," she said. "Well, that would sure be something, wouldn't it?" I replied. "So, if we have your permission, would it be all right if we went back and examined the tree?" Dr. Gosder inquired. "Be my guest," I said. "Great. We'll be out of your hair as soon as possible," he said in an assuring manner, before dismissing himself and heading to the backyard. I stayed inside and just got stuff done around the house, occasionally looking out to see how the scientists were doing. They were out there for at least a couple hours, taking measurements, documenting their findings and other such things. I didn't see them leave, but eventually I looked out the back window and didn't see them anymore. I hope they got what it was they were looking for. About a month later, I was out on the tractor when my phone began to ring. I pulled it out of my pocket and saw that I was getting a call from a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway with a typical greeting. "Hello," I said. "Hi, Mr. Walker?" the voice on the other end said. "Speaking," I replied. "Hi, Mr. Walker. This is Dr. Gosder from the Laramie Ronson Institute. I was at your property about 4 weeks ago. How are you doing this morning?" "I'm well. How about yourself?" "I'm doing just fine. I'm calling to tell you that after speaking to my superiors about my findings on your property, we are interested in moving forward with more extensive research proceedings and are prepared to make you an offer for the rights to do further tests on the tree. Tell me, are you sitting down right now?" "Well, I'm currently on a tractor, so I am moving, but sitting nonetheless," I joked. That's when he said that they were fixing to offer me $178,000 to harvest the tree, for the purposes of doing further research on it. I was stunned when I heard the amount of money they were offering me. I'm glad I didn't fall off the tractor. I happily accepted their offer. He thanked me for my gracious gift to the scientific community and told me the check would be in the mail soon. I thanked him and we hung up. So, while I was still very much so perplexed by the tree, it looked as though it was about to net me a pretty penny. I figured this was an occasion that called for a nice, smooth glass of bourbon. With it being a small town and all, word traveled fast of my impending capital gain. And in no more than 3 days after getting the offer, lo and behold, it was front page news. There, plastered across the front page in bold lettering, where everyone across the county could see it, was the news of the sale. In what seemed like an attempt to shift the spotlight to himself, it appeared as though Bill had gone to the press as well. Because 2 days after the initial report, I saw in the paper that he was trying to stake some sort of claim to my small fortune, claiming that he gave me the seeds that grew the mystery tree, and that entitled him to a portion of the sum of money I was prepared to receive. An audacious and untrue claim, to say the least, but not unforeseen. It seems as though just about any time someone comes into a little bit of money, there's bound to be those who try to get a piece of it, spinning all sorts of craziness in their heads to justify their selfish, unfounded beliefs. It was later that day that things came to a head. I was outside pulling weeds in my yard when I heard footsteps come up behind me. "You don't deserve all that money," said a voice in a snarl. I stood up and turned around only to be met with a bludgeoning force to my face. I fell to the ground immediately in severe pain. Seeing stars, I looked up to see Bill and Carol standing there. Bill was stood there with a crazed look in his eyes and holding a chainsaw, that being what he appeared to have struck me with. "No, sir, you do not. My farm has been floundering for years, and you just luck into some fancy tree. Well, I'm not having none of that. He hissed sharply. "If I can't has the good fortune you got from this tree, then you can't neither." With that, he and Carol left me, heading further back into my backyard. Still being woozy from the blow I took to the head, there wasn't much I could do. Bill and Carol made their way over to the tree. When they made it to the base of the tree, Bill fired up the chainsaw. A palpable wave of dread washed over me, and I felt utterly helpless. Bill let out a primal holler before ramming the chainsaw into the trunk of the tree. He sawed away for a few seconds before pulling the chainsaw away from the tree. It appeared as though he hadn't even made a dent in the tree. "What in the—" he said aloud with a degree of confusion in his voice before going back to sawing at the trunk. Just then, a mighty stern gust of wind came, knocking Bill and Carol to the ground and knocking the chainsaw out of Bill's hands. "What kind of god-forsaken tree is this?" Bill exclaimed. "Well, I got something else for you," he said with a wicked look on his face. Getting himself up off the ground, Bill then pulled out a match, struck it, and slowly approached the tree. "If I can't cut you down, I'll burn you down," he cackled. He then continued in a hobbled shuffle towards the tree, holding the match out. But before he could set the tree alight, a branch swung down, striking Bill in the side of the head and knocking him to the ground. As Bill sat back up, clearly shaken from the blow he had just taken to the head, the tree then plunged the tip of one of the branches directly into the top of Bill's skull and lifted him up off the ground. He let out an unsettling grunt while jerking and twitching, as the color drained from his face and his body began to go limp. After about a minute, the tree retracted the branch, and Bill's lifeless body crumbled to the ground in a heap. At that, Carol attempted to get up and run away but stumbled. From the ground behind her came two sets of roots that wrapped around her legs as she tried to scurry away. I then watched as she was dragged, kicking and screaming into the ground beneath the base of the tree. After that, I heard the same low bellowing sound that I heard the first few nights, which I could now only assume was coming from the tree itself. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. After several more minutes, and after getting my wits about me, I got up and collected myself. I went back inside and lay down on the couch. Figured some rest was certainly in order after all the night's commotion. On the morning of January 14th, 2020, I woke up to see a tree in my backyard that I didn't recognize, but now I'm starting to think that it may not be a tree. Hey, something weird happened to me last night, and I need a little help wrapping my head around it. My wife Steph and I moved into this beautiful raised ranch home on 28 acres of forest in the Gatineau Hills yesterday, and I'm already regretting it. We got a lot unpacked and put away. I was even able to set up 4 wireless cameras around the outside of the house that sends a notification to my phone when there is motion, one for each side of the house. Unfortunately, the Ring camera won't be here until next week. Never needed to use any of this stuff being in the city, but I figured with all the wildlife around here, this would be a really good idea. I even set up the ringtone to be Carol Ann from Poltergeist saying "they're here" because I thought it'd be funny. After the long day, Steph and I were finally able to go to our new room and relax with a movie and cuddles. We were both exhausted and needed the break. We laid there and watched Scream 5 for about an hour before everything started. It was about 9 p.m., so it was pretty dark outside, especially with the cover of trees, but thank God for night vision. My phone goes off. I picked up the phone hoping to see maybe a deer or maybe even a bear since they are around these parts. I look at the camera that pinged, seeing nothing. Weird, but maybe it was a bird that flew off. I put the phone down and continued the movie. About 20 minutes later, alarm goes off again. I picked up my phone and again nothing there. This happened again 5 minutes later and again 5 minutes after that. It was then I decided to keep my phone in my hand and watch. I stared at my phone, trying to get a glimpse of what these cameras are picking up. Off in the tree line, I could see something moving behind a tree. I couldn't make it out though, it was just a mass bobbing out every so often.
They're here.
Something, what looked like a ball, was suddenly launched from where the mass hid, setting off the camera and falling out of frame. That was strange, and Steph agreed, but the thing isn't moving behind the tree anymore, so maybe it was a bear and went away. Can bears throw things? About 2 hours later, I was finally ready to turn in for the night. Steph had fallen asleep about 45 min earlier, and all was quiet with the cameras. Right when I had closed my eyes, the cameras went off.
They're here.
I grabbed the phone, groaned, and looked. It was the front camera this time. Again, nothing was there. Bang, bang, bang. Someone pounded on the door. I got up and rushed downstairs because the knocking was beginning to shake the house. Bang, bang, bang. I crept up to the violently beaten door to peer outside the people. Right before my eye hit the hole, the banging stopped and no one was there.
They're here.
My phone went off, making me jump off the ground. I looked at the phone just to see a white flowing garment leaving the frame. I opened the door and stepped outside. I was greeted with silence. It was as if the air itself had stopped. The pit of my stomach felt heavy, like a brick sat buried inside. The feeling was too much, so I went inside quickly, locking the door. I went around the house, making sure all the windows and doors were barred, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. Somehow my wife had just slept through it all and lay peacefully oblivious to the world. I sat there and pondered if I should maybe call the police, but decided against it, thinking worst, it's just some neighborhood kids knowing we just moved in. I laid down, but sleep had eluded me for a few hours, as I tossed and turned to await the terror to continue. I ended up falling asleep, but that only lasted 45 minutes when I heard it again.
They're here.
I looked at my phone 3 a.m. Clicking it on the camera came into view. A lone girl with long flowing hair and a white gown stood on my back lawn. Her head was down so I could not see her face, and she just stood there. I sat there for a minute just watching, making sure I wasn't hallucinating from my lack of sleep. I ended up waking Steph up to show her and make sure I wasn't going crazy. Yeah, she is definitely there. She may need help. We should really go down, she said. I agreed and we headed downstairs. My phone was in my hand as I periodically checked to make sure she was still there until we reached the back door. I opened the door slowly and shouted, "Are you okay over there?" She gave no response, so I headed outside. I walked slowly, asking her if I needed to call the police or if she needed to come inside, as Steph stayed back in case she needed to grab the first aid kit. As I got within 10 feet of her, she looked up. Her hair parted from her face, revealing a white mask. Blood-red droplets painted on resembling tears fell from the eye holes. I was so thrown off by the mask I almost missed her dropping a knife into her hand, concealed by the gown. She ran towards me and lunged, screaming like a wild animal. The knife came out, slicing the inside of my arm. Blood squirted out, splashing her dress. I moved to the side, throwing my arms out and shoving her down so she rolled away and I had time to run. I ran, hearing her get up, and her feet pound the grass made me run faster. I made it into the door, slamming it just in time, locking it. Steph grabbed my arm, asking what the hell just happened and who the hell was that. We quickly ran to the kitchen to clean up the cut fast, while the psychotic woman banged on the door with a knife.
They're here. They're here. They're here.
As Steph grabbed the first aid kit, I looked at my phone. More people were walking into the camera. They were all wearing white flowing clothes, and the ones whose faces I could see donned weird white masks. I grabbed Steph and raced upstairs without a word. Now they were banging on the front door and windows all around the house, trying to get in. We ran to our room where I locked our door. I toppled our dresser, barricading us in. I ran to the window and looked outside. About 5 people were standing under, looking up, knowing where we were. I took out my phone and dialed 911. It rang while Steph bandaged my arm the best she could, but I needed stitches. 911, what is your emergency? The operator asked. I yelled into the phone, explaining the situation, asking for the police, and fast. She told me they were 30 men out and to hold tight in a secured place. My phone continued to vibrate as more and more came out of the woods. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and handed Steph the knife I kept in my nightstand while the banging continued outside. A crash came from downstairs as they breached into the house. I could hear them shuffling downstairs, piling in. I held Steph close. We whispered our love for each other as the stairs creaked as they ascended them. We knew this was the end. If it was 1 or 2, then maybe I would have had a fighting chance, but there had to be at least 12, and I knew I wouldn't be able to fight my way out. They reached our door. Bang, bang, bang. There was a rhythmic pounding as they tried to get in. then metal scraping as they began to stab the door. A knife pierced through, shining a beam of light from the hallway. I kissed Steph one last time, closing my eyes as I held her as close as I could. The pounding stopped suddenly. No noise, no shuffling, nothing. I knew it was too good to be true, so I just waited for the shoe to drop. We sat there waiting for what seemed like an eternity, but in actuality, it was about 7 minutes of silence. Blue and red lights flashed against my eyelids, which made me open them. The cop shouted out hello from downstairs. We cautiously got up to go to the door, pushing the dresser out of the way and opening the door. The only thing out of place upstairs was the single knife hole in the door. I yelled at the cop that we were coming down. As we made our way down, again we realized nothing was out of place. As we reached the police officer, he introduced himself as Sergeant Bachmann and told us about the door being open, which is how he got in. After we explained the events of the night, I went to pull up the security footage of the event to show him. File corrupted was all that displayed. All the night's events were gone. As we looked around, the only evidence that anything happened was the knife hole, my arm, and our word. The police say they will have extra patrols in the area in case anything happens, but we have decided to stay in a motel not knowing what to do. That is where I am writing this now. What could it have been? People playing a prank? A cult? Ghosts? Aliens? I just don't know. I am at a loss here. How does that many people just show up and leave without a trace? Thunderstorms, the epitome of both nature's beauty and its wrath. I remember as a boy being terrified of them. Whenever a big storm rolled in, I would hide under my covers with a flashlight. My mother always assumed that it was the big claps of thunder hurting my ears that caused me so much distress. It seemed logical, but I never had any problems with fireworks or loud explosions in movies. At my core, I simply believed that there was something in the storm coming after me. As I grew older, the idea seemed silly. That was until last week. That was until the summer storm that struck the fear back into me. My wife and daughter Sylvie were on a trip to Boston for Sylvie's dance competition. I had to stay behind for work, which meant I had the whole place to myself. After I got home from work, I got in my comfiest casual clothes and threw on the TV for a night of baseball and action movies. The news was just finishing showcasing an emergency weather report. A massive thunderstorm was going to be rolling through in a matter of hours, and viewers were advised to take extra special care. I didn't care if there was a hurricane outside as long as it didn't interfere with my night. 2 hours later, I was deep into my Red Sox game when the mother of all sheet lightning lit up the sky like an atom bomb, and with it went my power. I grimaced at the empty room, my one night to myself, and now I had to spend it in the dark. I sighed and made my way to the fridge to grab a beer while it was still cold. I sipped my beer and merely stared out the window at the storm. The weather report wasn't exaggerating. This storm was an intense one. The winds whipped through the trees, tearing leaves and twigs from their branches. Lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, and with it the boom of thunder like great footsteps of a giant. I resorted to my childhood game of counting the seconds between flash and boom. The storm was growing closer, and soon it would be on top of me. That thought sent me back through time, and I found my childhood fear beginning to seep through me. The whistle of the wind began to sound like ghostly moaning. The branches of the trees were like great claws reaching for me. I tried to tell myself that I was being silly, but I couldn't help staring into the forest before me as if I was looking for something. I stared into the shaking branches, and I was convinced that there was something out there staring back at me. A growing part of me wanted to bolt upstairs and hide under the covers. Suddenly, a loud beeping erupted through the house, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It took me a moment to register that it was merely the ringer for a video call. I smiled and laughed at my childish fear. The power may have been out, but I still had service. I opened the call, and the beautiful faces of my wife and Sylvie greeted me. Their smiles pushed away the gloom of the storm, and I found myself the calm, rational adult that I should have been. They had heard about the storm and wanted to make sure I was all right. After assuring them that I was fine, they told me all about their trip. Sylvie's team had advanced to the finals tomorrow morning, and I couldn't be more proud of her. My wife went to the bathroom and Sylvie continued to tell me about all the exciting things she saw on the trip. I merely smiled and listened to her. Suddenly she grew confused and started staring at the window behind me. "Daddy, who is that out?" Sylvie began before the call suddenly ended, and I was left with a no-signal screen. Great, I was now stuck there with no power or phone. I turned around to check the storm's progress when another bout of lightning lit up the sky. The flash couldn't have lasted more than a second, but in that moment I could swear I saw someone in my backwoods. I shook my head at the impossibility of the matter, but it was only a matter of seconds before another flash took the sky. This time there was no mistaking it. There was a man between the trees. I could only see him in flashes, but I could tell that he wore a long, dark brown coat and a pitch-black hat. Another flash lit the sky, and man was now closer to the house. I could see that he was very old with long white hair. I had no idea who in the world would be back there. The woods were very small and private property. Besides, no sane person would be out in this rain and thunder. Another flash followed almost immediately by a clap of thunder. The storm was getting closer, and so was the old man who was now just behind my fence. A second flash followed the previous by mere milliseconds. This time the mysterious stranger stood in my backyard. A blast of sheet lightning broke into the sky and my whole yard became visible. The old man was at the bottom of the stairs leading to my deck. Only old man was the wrong word for him. What lay before those steps was a monster. His skin was a grayish purple and covered in defined ridges. He possessed no lips, allowing for his rows of misshapen and sharpened fangs to jut out for the world to see. Around his eyes were deep gouges of missing skin, revealing nothing but shadows underneath. His eyes were mesmerizing as they seemed to glow and pulse with purple electricity, like summer lightning. Those eyes were fixed directly on me. When the flash ended, I wasted no time bolting upstairs. I flew up to my room with my heart beating in my chest, threatening to burst. I rushed into my bedroom and locked the door tightly. Just as the lock snapped, another massive burst of lightning lit the sky. I could see my shadow on the wall, but it was not alone. Another shadow projected itself on the wall from behind the window pane. I could see the silhouette of the old man outside my second-story window. His long hair twisted in the wind and wiggled as if it was alive. The beast had its hands raised, and to my horror I could see long claws stretched out like knives. I could hear a subtle scratching at my window as if the monster was trying to get in. The flash passed and I dived under my blankets. I didn't care that I was a grown man pushing 40. I simply did not want to see outside anymore. As I lay there, I could see even through the thick comforter. A blast of lightning accompanied the most blaring burst of thunder that I have ever heard. The storm was now on top of my house. It was difficult to make out over the thunderous blast, but I could swear that I heard the sound of footsteps on my roof right above my head. I covered my ears and slammed my eyes shut with all my might, silently willing the creature to go away. I don't know how it was possible, but when I opened my eyes, it was the next morning. I was greeted to a beautiful sun rising behind the trees and the soft sound of birds singing in the distance. The blinking light of my alarm clock told me the power had been back on for several hours. I had somehow slept away the storm. In the light of the morning sun, my fear from last night seemed childish indeed. I looked at the window and found no scratch marks from some terrible fiend. I had decided that the whole experience was a nightmare brought on by childhood fear of storms. I made myself a coffee and decided to go outside to see the neighbors. Across the street were 2 police cars and an ambulance at Mrs. Patterson's house. The paramedics were taking a sheeted body out on a stretcher. My next-door neighbor, Wendy, was watching in shock and horror, so I asked her what happened. She told me that the wind from the storm blew something into Mrs. Patterson's window and she was struck dead. I looked back and felt the color drain from my face as I noticed what looked like claw marks at the top of her living room window. I found myself once again trying to tell myself it was all a terrible dream and that Mrs. Patterson's fate was a freak accident. After a few days, I managed to convince myself that everything was fine. That was until I found shingles from my roof in the bushes. I decided to climb to the roof to assess the damage. What I found nearly stopped my heart. There, scratched into the shingles, were the words, Billy, a name I haven't gone by since childhood. The storm may have passed for now, but another will be back, and when it does, you can be sure I'll have my curtains closed. I don't like people much. And due to a slew of personal reasons, most people don't like me either. To punctuate exactly how much I don't like being around others, I just recently purchased a new house so completely out of the way that my nearest neighbor is at least 1.5 miles from me. That's right, just me and nothing but the animals and trees in all directions. Now, a lot of people would call me crazy for living out here like this. If some disaster were to happen, I'd pretty much be screwed, I know. But I'm at a point in my life where I don't think I care much about that. Well, I thought I didn't. I'm such a fool. Having left the town I previously lived in at about 7 in the morning, it was at least midday by the time I'd finally hauled my beat-up truck and the few possessions I own up the curving path to my new abode. Like a monstrous serpent of earth and gravel cut right through the dense pine forest, this driveway was about 1/3 of a mile long in itself, and full of so many rocks and potholes I was sure I'd get stuck. But due to some miraculous stroke of luck, I managed to avoid having to call a tow company. The trees and greenery finally fell away to reveal a clearing with a modestly sized cabin near its center. I stepped out of my pickup, slamming the door behind me, and causing a few birds to scatter from their nearby hiding spots among the thick and tangled pine trees. With gravel crunching underfoot, I walked around to the back of the truck and began unloading. Now, I said I didn't have many possessions. This is true. Regardless of this fact, it still took me about 6 hours getting it all unloaded. The furniture was the hardest part. Damn near broke my back dealing with the armchair. But like I said, I don't do company well, and this includes people for moving assistance. I groaned aloud as I stretched a bit, wiping sweat from my brow as I cast my gaze up toward the setting sun. Snap. It was a loud cracking sound that echoed deep from the woods. Must have been loud as hell because it was plenty audible even at such a far distance. Damn serious tree branch right there, I said to myself as I looked in the direction it had seemingly come from. The forest was so dense that visibility fell off at around 50 feet, being replaced with gnarled branches and darkness. Didn't help that the sun was halfway down, causing eerie-looking shadows to stretch across the lawn toward my house. Regardless of all this, I focused my gaze on the spot intently. A deer? Bear, maybe? At some point I realized I'd been holding my breath for some silly reason, letting out a long exhale. Just when I was turning toward the steps that lead to my front porch, I heard it again. Another resounding snap that sprang from the dark of the woods. I whirled around to face it, but again nothing was there. Jumping at damn twigs now? I asked myself, chuckling as I finally peel my gaze from the forest and walk into the cabin, shutting the ornately carved wooden door behind me. Standing in the entryway, I looked around my new home with a grin. It really was a nice place. Had that old rustic feel to it that resonated with all the classic mountain home vibes I'd been searching for. It had even been given some pretty modern appliances. Had some nice motion floodlights on the outside as well. And I got it all for what was practically a steal. Admittedly, I didn't feel like unpacking too much after all that heavy lifting, so the majority of my possessions would remain in this room for now, standing up against the wall in neat stacks. I slipped my work boots off and moved on into the kitchen to make myself some dinner. Well, dinner being a couple cups of ramen noodles and a beer. I realized with a groan that I'd have to go into town for some groceries, eventually. I went ahead and unpacked the TV and an old rocking chair, setting both objects down in my new living room so I could watch one of the many shitty B-movies I'd brought with me. I was a sucker for goofy horror stuff. I threw open the window next to me for some of that cool air and started digging into my ramen. Crack. I felt like I just about jumped out of my damn clothes when I heard it. Another snapping branch in the woods, but this one was closer? Yes, it was definitely closer. I settled back down in my chair, but my eyes were once again glued to the forest. Why was this setting me off? The damn woods were full of animals and sticks. It wasn't weird to hear a few snap now and then. Regardless of my attempts at telling myself how ridiculous I was being, I still gazed out the window. It was darker out there now, so I was even less likely to see anything. It was then that I realized just how quiet it was. Not counting the loud freaking branches, I mean. Not a bird call to be heard. Maybe they were sleeping, I thought. But why hadn't there any crickets chirping? I'd started to feel a headache build up in the back of my skull, sweat on my brow despite the cool air blowing in through the window. Okay, enough of that then, I'd said aloud as I get up from my chair with a grunt, promptly shutting and latching the window. I'd started to wish that I had brought curtains with me. Figured I wouldn't need any this far away from anyone else, but now I felt exposed, vulnerable even. But the old .22 rifle I'd brought up here with me did provide a bit of comfort. I started back on my meal that had begun to cool. Guess I'd been looking out that window for longer than I thought. Sometime later I'd cleaned up and gone down the hall to my bedroom. It was about 10 p.m. now, and a glance out the window showed only an ocean of blackness. It was one of those moonless, starless nights that made you feel like you were out in space. By now my headache had grown considerably, and I felt like I'd needed the help of my medication to get any meaningful sleep. Yeah, the meds are related to my issues regarding other people. Gulping a sleeping pill, I climbed on into the bed this cabin had also come with. The mattress was surprisingly a lot more comfortable than I thought it'd be too. Wouldn't be long before I'd drift off into another one of those long, dreamless sleeps I was so used to these days. Not long at crack. Up I sat looking around left and right, but what greeted me wasn't the cozy walls of my bedroom. In all directions stretched nothing but dark, silent woods. If it hadn't been for the lantern, I wouldn't be able to see anything. Where'd this lantern even come from? Snap! Stabbing through the nothingness like a knife was that damn noise again. I didn't know what to do. Panic had begun to grip my insides like I was choking on freezing water. I had to get out of here. Crack. I had to run. No, damn it, no! I let out as I began my frenzied dash through the forest. Branches reach out from all sides like skinny clawed hands, ripping at my clothes and skin, but I couldn't even begin to care about my physical state at the time. I knew I just had to get out of there. Snap. Behind me, another one of those god-awful snapping sounds chased me from the dark as it drew closer. What? What was even out there? Damn it, what was it? My head felt like it was going to burst, and I was absolutely covered in scrapes and cuts. I almost fall and split my skull open on a rock I didn't see, but caught myself at the last moment. Crack. The noises were increasing in frequency and volume, I realized. It was getting closer. Tears stung my eyes as I cried out into the darkness, as if this would stave off the futility of my situation. But just when I thought all hope was lost, I broke free from the woods into a familiar clearing. Yes, I yelled. I'd made it home, I just have to get inside, just have to... What I see in the clearing isn't my house. With the dim light my lantern provides, I see a tree. A massive tree. The trunk stretches high into the sky, and its many leafless branches look like the arms of some sort of colossal upside-down insect. Its twisted legs attempting to pluck the very moon from the sky. I'm transfixed by the sight, absolutely dumbfounded. Snap. The horrible sound from mere feet behind me had pulled my mind back into focus. But I know it's pointless to run now. I stand there, rooted to the ground just like the tree before me. I didn't want to see what it is, like the mere sight of it will cause me harm. I refused to turn around. I just wanted it to be over with. Clenching my hands into fists, I shut my eyes tightly, waiting for the white-hot pain of an early death to tear through me. Then I woke up. Drenched in sweat, I opened my eyes to see the ceiling in my room. God damn, I'd said with a croak as I practically threw the sheets off of me. Rolling out of bed, I staggered into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of ice water. It felt so good, soothing my raw vocal cords. Had I been screaming in my sleep too? Those meds were supposed to keep that from happening, I'd thought as I rubbed my hand down my face. And why did that dream feel so real? That tree. I felt like I'd seen it before. It finally dawned on me after a few minutes of silent contemplation. I turned toward the back door, opening it after more hesitance than I probably needed. The backyard was expansive, surrounded by woods on all sides except the one facing my house. A few small trees dotted the lawn here and there, but smack dab at its center was a gigantic tree stump. The thing had to be at least 10 or 11 feet wide by my count. I'd seen this in one of the pictures that had advertised the house on the website I found it on. Apparently most of the wood that made up my cabin came from this thing. I walked across the lawn, letting the cool morning air soothe my still very warm body, until I stopped a few feet away from the stump, looking down at it. Well, this stump was certainly a lot more dead than the tree in my nightmare, but the width of it seemed spot on. Having such a god-awful dream on the first night in my dream home seemed par for the course with my luck. I turned and trudged my way back inside, but not before taking one last look at the woods toward the very back of my yard. It was midday after an uneventful morning passed, and I decided that maybe I would just bite the bullet and head into town for those groceries. And curtains, I grimly reminded myself. The whole way there I just kept looking into the woods on either side of my path. And when I rolled over a branch, the snapping noise it caused damn near made me swerve off the road. Those damn woods. I took a breath to calm myself. Just a dream, you'll love it here, I said. The drive took about 40 minutes or so, total. but I could probably cut the time down after I remove all those rocks and fill in the potholes. The transition from dirt and gravel into pavement marked my arrival into the small pocket of civilization that was the town. Toward the center was a small shopping center that pretty much held all of the businesses here. Found myself a parking spot and went inside. I walked through the sliding doors of the grocery store, past the only employee stationed at the checkout area. Looked like an older woman, her hair tied up in a messy gray bun. She had thick glasses that really gave her an elderly librarian sort of look. I hope to God she wasn't chatty. After about 20 minutes of walking around on old and yellowed floor tile, I'd amassed a fairly decent haul of items. I figured it was time to check out, so I turned and started down the somewhat claustrophobic aisle when a snapping sound from behind caused me to come to a dead stop. Here? There's no way, just no way. I hear myself choking out. I whipped my head around so fast it could have broken my neck, but to my intense relief I just see another employee. He was using a box cutter to break plastic straps that held a box closed. I stared for a moment before a laugh slipped its way out involuntarily, causing the guy to look my way in confusion. Realizing I probably looked crazy for doing so, I promptly turned and walked the rest of the way to the front. The elderly woman behind the checkout counter offered me a smile, and I did the best to return the gesture, but it just felt awkward and forced, as usual. "Haven't seen your face before. New in town?" she asks me. Inwardly I groaned. Yep, there's the question. I attempted to answer her as cheerfully as I could muster. "Yeah, just moved in yesterday, actually." She nodded as she continues to scan my items. I wished she'd scan them faster. She spoke up again. "I can always tell I got an eye for faces. Whereabouts are you located anyway?" I blink a few times. "Moved into a place up the dirt road, the new cabin," I said before my brain knows what it's doing. Why did I say all that? Could have just made something up. Well, she's just some old lady anyway, I figured. I broke out of my train of thought when I realized she'd fixed me with a strange expression, her prior demeanor having melted away. She would then wordlessly hand me my last bag, and I took it from her confused. Had I offended her somehow? Typical. In the end, I let out an awkward half-laugh before opting to leave with a quick goodbye. The drive home was done in complete silence. Upon getting home, I began to hurriedly throw curtains up over all the windows. I tried to tell myself it was just for the sake of privacy, but that was a thinly veiled excuse at best. Only after blocking my view of the forest completely did I prepare dinner. I put on some music and even sang along to it, trying to block out any other potential outside sounds. More time passed and it was eventually 8 p.m. The sun was well into setting. I could see only a faint bit of light slipping in from between the curtains in my living room. I sat down into my armchair that I'd unpacked a few hours ago, sighing and watching some of that mind-numbing TV. At some point I guess I'd slipped into an unwanted nap, because the next thing I knew I'm jolted awake once again by the TV I'd left on, I'd so conveniently decided. Looking at my watch, I saw it was 12 a.m. Great, I'd ruined my sleep schedule with a 4-hour nap. With a groan, I rose from my chair and fumbled my way down the dark hallway to my room. I'd figured that after last night I should try 2 pills instead of 1 this time. This way I'll be out like a light for sure. I'd taken both, slipping into bed and rolling onto my side to see my now curtained window through the gloomy darkness of my room. 20 minutes pass and I'm really starting to feel those pills taking effect. That familiar fuzzy feeling in my brain was setting in and I was... Snap. My drooping eyes open wide, bloodshot. My gaze is locked on the window. It was out there in my yard, I just knew it was. Inwardly, I fought with myself to rise from my bed and walk over to the curtains. I had to know. If I knew, I'd stop being so afraid. It's just a damn wild animal, just an animal, just an animal. Just an animal, I whispered as I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek through. It was dark out there. Dark enough that the meager moonlight only allowed vague silhouettes to reveal themselves. Had to look around for a moment before I finally spotted. Toward the center of the clearing stood a familiar shape. A deer? No, a bit too big. I decided that it's an elk, but it was just so hard to see that all I got was a dark elk-shaped blob. I could make out its tall, lanky legs, and its huge set of branching antlers that sprouted atop its head. I sighed in relief, grinning to myself for being such a baby about all this. I'd begun to look away when another snap from outside caused me to turn back around in confusion. What was it stepping on to make those noises? I cleared my yard pretty well this morning. I continued to watch it curiously, but I could feel those pills taking effect more and more with each passing second. After about a minute of watching the thing, it finally dawned on me. Didn't I have motion lights? Why weren't they on? Actually, had this thing moved at all since I started watching it? I attempted to swallow, but my throat was dry. I kept watching it. Another minute passes, then 2 more. Please, just move, please, I said hopelessly. But it just stands there in the dark like a statue, like something fake. God damn it, why wasn't it moving? It was wrong. Everything about this was just so wrong, I decided. A noise catches my attention, a soft creaking noise coming from the elk. The thing... It grew in intensity until... crack. It's antlers, it's goddamn antlers. They twitched, then cracked and shifted like those insect-like tree limbs I'd dreamt of. Like someone breaking an arm out of place in multiple angles. Like... crack. The antlers shift again and crack again a few more times. I shut the curtains quickly to block it from view, but the memory of it is burnt into my mind. It was dark in my room. It didn't see me. It couldn't have seen me. Please God, don't let it have seen me, I thought. I just end up sitting there on the floor under the window, panting and sweating, waiting for something to happen. But even with this fresh fear coursing through me, I could feel those pills fighting to put me under. Staring up at the clock on my bedside table, I started counting the passage of time. 12:30 a.m., 12:45 a.m., 12:50 a.m. I'm finally out around this time, I think, but I have that same horrible dream and I wake up screaming in the morning. From my very uncomfortable spot on the floor, I was relieved to see that there was light streaming in through the curtains. I got up, stiff from my unfortunate sleeping location, and threw them open to reveal an empty backyard with that massive stump at its center. That thing was standing on that stump, wasn't it? No, it wasn't, I stubbornly thought. There wasn't anything there. That was all. All just some sleeping pill-fueled hallucination. This whole thing has just been in my head like everything always is, I tell myself. What an idiot I was. Regardless of how much I tell myself it didn't happen, I only went outside once to get the mail down at the end of my driveway. Otherwise I was shut up in my cabin with the music blaring. I really like this music. I dug out some books that I hadn't touched since buying. I put on a movie, only to realize halfway through that I'd watched it the day I moved in. Something kept distracting me. The thought of that thing I saw through my window. But I just as quickly reminded myself that it wasn't possible. This was reality, not some nightmare. The worst things in these woods were bears, and even then they won't go out of their way to kill you. My attempts at reassuring myself were useless, and I could feel my anxiety growing as the hours slipped by. At around 6 p.m. I decided to shower, and I stayed in there for about an hour. Yeah, a hit to the water bill, but I really needed it. I actually did feel a bit better afterwards too. Slipping into bed after changing, I sat there in silence. I figured that I'd forgo the sleeping pills, to prove to myself that all of this was just the side effects of some faulty drugs, and I'd end up getting a lot of money for financial compensation or some shit. Yeah, they were supposed to keep me from having shitty dreams, but the last 2 were worse than anything I'd ever dreamed before, and I wasn't about to go through that a 3rd time. I stared at the clock, watching the time tick forward and internally on high alert for any totally not real noises. But I didn't hear anything. Only the usual forest sounds of crickets. I slid further under the covers and let sleep take me, for better or worse. Why hadn't I just taken the damn pills? I woke up startled awake by rapid thudding footsteps coming down my hall. It was here in my freaking house. How? I just kept asking myself how as I scrambled toward the edge of my bed, toward the wall that had my .22 mounted on it, but it was too late. My door flew open, but what stepped in wasn't the thing outside my window. It was a man in dark clothes. Yes, someone had broken in. I froze in my tracks as I noticed he had a gun pointed at me. "Don't you freaking move!" he yelled at me, and I flinched from the volume. I complied, remaining stationary. Look, I don't have much to steal. I tried to say, but I'm cut off by another scream from the intruder. "Shut the hell up or I'll blow your brains out. Come here." He gestured to me with the weapon, and I reluctantly did as he commanded, walking towards the open door. Why was my luck so shit? I get over these nightmares just to be confronted with a very real situation like this. He'd forced me out ahead of him, into the adjacent living room down the hall. "Stand right freaking there," he said, and I did so. I stood there silently for almost 15 seconds. What was this? Was he thinking about what to do with me? A sharp blow to the back of my head with his gun answered that question. I fell to the floor, hitting my head again on its cool surface. The whole world just started spinning. Had my eyes on this place for a few days. He told me, walking around my crumbled form. I could feel a warm trail running down the back of my head from where he'd hit me. You should really start locking your doors. Damn it, I'd been so scatterbrained yesterday I forgot even that much. This guy had really taunted me about it too, the goddamn asshole. Couldn't he just steal all my shit and get it over with? He had been about to hit me again, I think, when it happened. Crack. That noise, it came suddenly and loudly. Even in my dazed state, I could feel the fear bubbling up. My attacker apparently heard it too, which meant it was real. It had always been real. What was that? He asked aloud, looking down to me. You got someone living here with you, huh? I shook my head as best as I could manage, but another snap from outside drew his attention again. Yeah, you do, freaking liar, he spat out at me. He angrily marched his way down the hall, wood creaking under his shoes, as he barged out through the back door and into the darkness, bellowing loudly. Hey, don't move or I'll shoot your... The motion sensor lights snap on like they were designed to do. They hadn't been wrongly installed or faulty, of course. The only wrong thing in this situation was that thing outside. From my angle on the floor, I couldn't see the man anymore. Just the illumination cast into the room by those bright lights outside. I heard the dumbfounded confusion in the man's voice. His absolute lack of understanding at what he no doubt saw standing in the middle of my yard. What the hell, he'd said. Snap, 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 snap. Then the screaming began. First in terror, sheer unadulterated terror. I heard him running back to the house, screaming like that the whole way. The snapping and cracking was maddening, like whatever out there was excited to see that pitiful man. A shark smelling blood is what came to my mind at the time. His screams shifted almost instantly to those of agony, and he began to beg for his life. The sound of his voice was being rapidly moved from place to place outside, as if he were being thrown about by some great force. I struggled with all my might to get to my feet, and finally did so. Moving down toward the open back door, I had to fight against all my instincts that were telling me to flee right then and there. As I reached the door, I shut my eyes. I didn't want to see it. I thought I did before, but now I knew without a doubt in my mind that I absolutely must not see it. A few warm droplets splash across my face right before I slam the door shut, locking it. Cracking like someone bending a bundle of twigs until they all broke at the middle, I turned and frantically sprinted to my front door. The door that the would-be robber had probably come through. Finding it unlocked told me this hunch was true, and I promptly locked that door as well. Turning again to my back door, I now only realized that the screaming from outside still hadn't stopped. It had only grown more intense. I could hear vague words and phrases. His pleading had devolved into what sounded borderline deranged. He apologized over and over to his dad, his mom, others I could only assume he knew. At one point, his screaming turned into hideous laughter, only to return to screaming minutes later. Even when blood filled his lungs, even when his vocal cords were shredded, he kept screaming. Why wasn't he dead? How wasn't he dead? I felt absolute sorrow for this man, and he'd beat me over the head and tried to rob me only minutes earlier, snapping like someone breaking every bone in their body. How can I most accurately describe the sounds he made? Maybe like a guy who'd fallen into a wood chipper feet first. But if his death was played out in slow motion, the man outside my house screamed like this for an hour and a half. I know this for a fact, because all I could do the whole time was stare across the room at the clock on the wall. What else could I have done besides sit and listen? The snapping noises of the thing outside and what I assumed were the man's bones being broken just blended together. Finally, mercifully, the screaming tapered off into a pitiful gurgling whine and then silence. I sat there, I just kept sitting there, not moving, not even to get up and clean my head wound. I sat until the sun had long since risen, and when I finally got up, it felt like my body was made of jelly. I walked to the bathroom, looking into the mirror. What had felt like warm rain on my face when I'd been at the door earlier was made out to be speckles of blood that had long since dried. After frantically cleaning it all off in the sink, I left the room, then looked to the back door. Walking to it made me feel like I was on the moon. Everything was in slow motion. This couldn't have been real, I pointlessly thought. I finally pushed it open after what felt like a million years had came and went. It had been real. It had all been real, of course. What I saw I'll never forget. All the drugs in the world won't dull that scene. Strewn about my yard was the man. Yes, I'm sure that was him, all over the place. The grass was stained red. and looking to the side of my house revealed it was painted a similar color. There was meat everywhere, organs, fractured bones stabbed vertically into the earth. But the bones were so white, so clean. I doubled over and puked up the remnants of last night's dinner. Warm bile and snot coated my mouth and nose and left me choking for breath as I sputtered. Raising my head again, I noticed something else in the middle of all this carnage. The tree stump had grown into a tree again. It was alive again, significantly shorter than the one in my dreams, but still definitely a tree. In the twisted branches of that tree hung the man's intestines, draped from branch to branch like fleshy power lines. Across the front of the broad dark trunk, facing my house, lay his skin. It had been so intricately removed from his body that I could practically see the expression of frozen agony on its stretched face. The day went by in a blur and it's almost night again. I don't know what to do. I can't call the freaking police about this. What do I tell them? That someone broke into my house and then what? They carefully disassembled themselves and posed their body parts in my backyard? This is the kind of thing people get executed for, I imagine. My track record isn't the best to begin with. I decided it was best to just clean it up, to hide it all and pretend it never happened. It's hard getting several meters worth of guts out of a tree, especially when you stop to puke every 5 minutes. And I'll need to buy a power washer for my walls. But I realized something else while I was out there cleaning that asshole up off my lawn. And this horrible thought only solidified into truth when I heard the increasingly close snapping of branches out in the woods a few minutes ago. That tree doesn't look like it's finished growing yet.